great. I would love to start just by having you introduce yourself.
Sure. I am Eder Campuzano, a former managing editor at The Emerald, and currently a general assignment reporter for the Star Tribune in Minneapolis, where I'm also now the lead author of our new flagship newsletter. The Star Tribune is actually undergoing its own revolution, actually. About a decade after the Daily Emerald went from, publishing 5 editions a week and kind of putting a more heavy emphasis on online. The Star Tribune is actually one of the highest circulated daily newspapers in the country, usually right behind the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and New York Times. So the paper hasn't really had to worry that much about kind of making that transition, or at least because the print revenue had been so stable compared to other newspapers, they are just now getting to the point where they're thinking a lot more digitally. It used to be kind of oh, we can toy around with some things, but there's a huge overhaul in the offing that's going to be rolling out through the summer and kind of into the 2024 election. So all of that is to say that the kind of new front page, if you will, for the newspaper and the delivery mechanism for a lot of like the top stories is becoming a newsletter. So we're still going to have, 7 print editions with a heavy emphasis on like the Sunday package every week. But, the paper is moving more toward a digital subscription, kind of digital first model. And the newsletter initiative, it's called Essential Minnesota, is a big part of that huge rebranding. My part in it is to basically take the top story for each day every morning. We're sending it between 9:30 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. local time. And my editor and I really have the latitude to decide, okay, what are the 3 or 4 stories that we want to do a little bit of writing about and then link back to all of our coverage? And then what headlines do we just want to toss in there to give them priority and tell people, hey, if you're going to read anything on the Star Tribune website today, this is it. This is what you need to be reading. So that's kind of the long and short of what brought us to this current moment at the Star Tribune, and also kind of my involvement with the newsletter.
That's super exciting. Yeah, it's really cool to see how newsrooms across the country are kind of, catching up to this digital revolution that we've been having.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about your time in undergrad. In your time in undergrad, not only were you involved with the Daily Emerald, but you're also contributing to Flex Magazine, OR Magazine, and it's also my understanding that you were contributing to The Torch at Lane Community College. I wanted to ask what that was like, kind of navigating all of those roles. Was it simultaneously? Did you, jump back and forth between, different positions in those different publications? Did you have a lot on your plate at that time?
Yeah, so if we want to start from the beginning, so I was a non-traditional student. I graduated high school in 2005, but I did not start college until 2009. That's because I was an undocumented immigrant and I didn't have my green card until right at the end of my senior year, like when it was too late to apply for FAFSA, to get like, as much money as I could for that coming fall. So, um, after I got my green card, I started working and did retail, which was actually like really helpful. And I'll get into that in a minute. But, when I was 18 and making like $2, $3 above the minimum wage, almost working full time, I was like, oh, why go to school? And so I started a little bit late because of that. I did have a 1-year stint as the managing editor for The Torch, even though I was only enrolled at Lane for 1 term back in 2005 when I was 18. And so when I decided to go back to school, that was sort of like the first place that I looked to kind of get back into writing, reporting shape, because I always knew I wanted to be a reporter. I always knew I wanted to be a journalist. And starting at my community college paper, I was news editor for a term, then managing editor. I've only ever been like in management in
Yeah.
student media. And I got appointed as the editor-in-chief for my second year at Lane Community College. And when I was, bidding for that job, there was one other person in the running who was a little greener, reporting wise especially. But in terms of like design, visuals, like the business of a newsroom, he was also really, really, really good at that stuff. And so I asked him to be my managing editor, where the year that I was the editor in chief of the Torch at Lynn Community College, I was the editor in chief overseeing all editorial, right? Like these are the stories we should be going after. This is the way we should be reporting them out. And he helped too. Andy Rosbach was my managing editor at the Torch, and he completely redesigned the paper. He was the guy in charge of the visuals. And, after our 2 years there together, we both went to the University of Oregon, and I spilled out off to do a little bit more magazine work because that's like, I don't know, I've been doing so much straight news and I was really curious about the features and the magazine writing side of things. So I started at Flux, did OR Magazine, and as I was kind of finishing up my second year at Flux, I was just kind of like missing the daily grind of a newspaper. At least, I was working on a weekly one before. And kind of out of nowhere, actually, Andy, McKenna Brown, and Nate, they asked me if I was interested in being the print managing editor for the Emerald. They were opening the position up because somebody had just left. And so I applied for it. I got it. And in April of 2013, I joined the staff of the Emerald as the print managing editor. So I oversaw a lot of the workflow. And honestly, like the work-life balance was the biggest thing for me, even back then. Like before we were all thinking about work-life balance, like one of the pledges that I made to the design team and to the managing editors at the Emerald was, all right, I know that you guys have talked about getting out at like 11 p.m., midnight sometime on Sundays for production night. I'm cutting out at 8 p.m. Like that is my hard stop. We all need to have lives. So I configured the workflow so that, we all come in at noon, we know what we're doing, we're having the staff meeting. And honestly, we're just going to work our asses off to get this thing out by 8 and go have a night and come back rested and relaxed to take on the rest of the week. So that was like my big thing when I became a manager at the Emerald, just like, how do we make it as efficient as possible? How do we get people at a reasonable time, maintain, right, the quality, and just, again, give people some time back so that they can actually enjoy their lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel like there were any particular experiences from your time in that role at the Emerald that, helped prepare you for your current career? Maybe it was, learning how to navigate that work-life balance, or maybe it was something like a particular skill set or something like that.
Yeah, actually, so I, because I was a manager the entire time I was at the Emerald, I had the benefit of like being able to look at the daily grind, or at least like the output, in a way that frankly the beat reporters didn't have the luxury of doing. So at the time, our student government reporter was Alex Wallachie, and she did a great job following like the day-to-day, the nitty-gritty, and everything that was going on at ASUO. But it's that kind of like go, 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 go that didn't give her enough time to go out and do something like the last time that, I know they don't like to call it a surplus, but it's a surplus. Like when ASUO had a surplus in 2015, I just took the number and found like a house near campus that they could buy with it, and came up with a bunch of other stuff that they could buy with this like $200,000 or $250,000 surplus, like, enough 18 racks of PBR to give everyone enrolled at the university like
Yeah.
their own plus one or two or whatever.
Mhm.
So I did stuff like that, like out of the box kind of ways of delivering the news to university students that it's harder to do when you're on the day-to-day grind. Um, I also, again, because so much of my work was on the back end, refining headlines, kind of looking at URLs and everything. I got a lot of practice in with SEO, and also just like
Yeah.
figuring out when to publish, what to publish to uh, basically like get traffic on my stories. One of the first challenges I ever put forth to the sports desk was they were averaging something like 20 to 22,000 page views on their recaps of Oregon football games. I started watching Breaking Bad during slow times on production night when the show was still like, doing its original airing, and writing recaps like as I went, publishing as soon as the episode was over. And I was raking in like 22 to 25,000 hits on
Mhm.
those. And so I was like, guys, if you can outdo my Breaking Bad recaps with your football coverage, I know you can do it. Like there's a way to do it, whether it's writing a little differently, thinking about headlines a little differently, publishing at different times. If you can amass more page views on your Oregon football coverage than I can just writing these Breaking Bad recaps, I'll take you out for beers or something.
Yeah.
But like those kinds of skills, I think really helped me propel in my career because the first job that I got at the Oregonian was on a trending team that was more than anything like designed to uh, find stories that people really wanted to read and that would have a wide reach so that we could get a bunch of traffic and then siphon that off to the rest of the newsroom. So, I mean, my time as a managing editor, especially that first full year, I really credit to a lot of the work that I get to do now.
Mhm. Yeah, that's incredible. It seems like it kind of went hand in hand in that way. And I remember you saying a few minutes ago that you kind of have always known that you have wanted to be a journalist. Do you remember what initially sparked your interest there, or if there was a moment that it kind of clicked for you and you realized, oh, this is definitely what I want to be doing?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was a few different things. I mean, when I was in third grade, I distinctly remember like one of the few things that I can remember about being an elementary schooler, were like getting invited to this writing workshop at the community center in McMinnville, my hometown. And like, I don't know, that's when it kind of started percolating for me that like, oh, I might be good at writing, I guess. And then you fast forward to high school and, you know, my one of my best friends was doing the high school paper and I was getting like A's on all my essays and I would turn them in like I would do them like the night before. So I thought it was like, okay, this is an easy extracurricular where I can go in and just kind of like mess around, for lack of a better term, and just like get my work done, hang out with my friends. So I job shadowed a reporter in my hometown, which kind of solidified it. And I was like, yeah, maybe I can do this. His job is literally to just like talk to people all day and then write about it. And then he gets to leave his desk and go to lunch whenever he wants. Like, I come from a working class family where my dad, all my uncles, like they're in agriculture. So they don't really get to have those kinds of breaks or that fluidity with their schedule. That really spoke to me. And so when I started at the high school paper, my first beat was covering girls golf for the Bruin at McMinnville High School. Didn't know what I was doing, but I kind of got a kick out of like learning things here and there, and then just again talking to people, putting it in print. And I don't know how much of that exists now or how much of it will for students down the line, but like the first time that you see your byline in print on that front page, you're like, it's a feeling,
Mhm.
right? Um, and so going from that to just like not really I don't know, like by the time that I was the news editor for my high school paper and I was doing layout, I was reporting stories and just like having those very spirited debates on like what should go A1 and like what goes inside, like it started to feel like there was nothing else I really wanted to do. And
Yeah.
so that for me, like for lack of a better term, or for about yeah lack of a better anecdote if you will, like that's what
No.
really got me thinking like I want to do this. And when I did a journalism camp through the Oregonian at the end of my senior year of high school, um, I spent a week working with professional editors and reporters and photographers to put out a newspaper, like the fastest clip that I'd ever done it in. And during that same summer camp, one of the copy editors, I think she was, or one of the assistant news editors for the Daily Emerald, was one of the mentors. And she was like, do you guys want to see the newsroom? And even when it was like completely empty during the summer, like the
Yeah.
musk from the library, right? Like from all those old editions of the paper, and then just like seeing the way that the Emerald newsroom was laid out very similarly to my hometown papers, like desks and everything. I was just like, it's like the same thing. Like it feels like if I want to keep doing this, then this is where I should go, right? And so like that experience just really got me stuck on the University of Oregon. The Daily Emerald was like the place to be if I wanted to do this for the rest of my life.
That's really sweet. That's a great memory. I can definitely attest that that smell is still there from all the archival editions. And I was curious too, this is kind of switching gears a little bit, but if you could tell me a little bit about education reporting in Minnesota specifically. And I know that you were on that beat at the Oregonian, and I'm curious if there's ways that the K-12 beat differs from state to state, that kind of thing.
I think it's funny because I think I went from one state that had a very distinct sort of like home rule, pride and local control of public schools mission and sort of like mindset to another state that's very, very similar. Like the similarities between Oregon and Minnesota are just mind-boggling. I mean, when we moved out here, I very much got like a bizarro world sentiment where I was like, oh, you guys also like going outside, but instead of hiking and like climbing mountains, you go to the lakes, right? Or yeah, like you drive up to the North Shore and you hike along or paddle Lake Superior. Education was also very similar because, again, in Oregon, there's a very there there the way that the K-12 education system is built there is very much home rule. Your local decision makers are the ones who should be making the choices about what happens with curriculum and, literally everything else that happens in your local schools. Same thing here. The biggest difference between Oregon and Minnesota is that Minnesota is kind of where the charter school movement got its legs and got going. And so the amount of people who would send their kids to private school or Oregon has charter schools, but out here for every charter school in Oregon, there's probably like 20 in Minnesota. And so that was a huge adjustment to make, along with the fact that, in Oregon, every election kind of comes down to whether Democrats will have a super majority or just like a simple majority where they can pass laws without any Republican input, or whether they need a few to craft policy. And here it is much more evenly split. Like this is the first time in a couple of decades that Democrats have had full control of state government, but for 10, 15 years it's been maybe a Republican has the governorship and Democrats have both chambers, or the chambers are split and there's a Democrat in office in in the governor's mansion. So that, like, having that specific dynamic at the state government level, because I covered statewide K-12 education. So whatever was happening at the state level and trickling down to schools, it was my job to figure it out. I got a lot of deja vu, to be completely honest, because most of the work that I was doing at the Oregonian and the last big project that I got grant funding for at the Oregonian were deep dives into literacy, right? And whether Portland Public Schools specifically was doing well or right by Black and Brown students, and like getting them up to speed to close the gaps in like academic performance and then academic opportunity between Black and Latino students and their white peers. And as soon as I come out to Minnesota, like, oh my goodness, that's what the state legislature and like literally everybody else is focused on. Like that was the last big sort of aside from school resource officers, that was the last sort of big topic that I was covering here in Minnesota schools. And honestly, redoing a lot of the same stories I was doing in Oregon, looking at the research and bringing my lived experience from that state to, oh, guess we're doing it again. So a lot of deja vu over here between the digital revolution and, again, like the education topics that I'm covering or was covering.
That's fascinating. It's funny that it's like parallel in that way. I'm going to start wrapping it up here. But I wanted to ask before we go if there was a piece of advice that you wish you could have given yourself when you were just starting out at the Emerald, or when you were, in your time in undergrad, just kind of fledging your career in journalism. Is there something that you wish you would have done differently, something that you wish you would have known, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I've been ruminating on this a little bit, and I think if there's one big thing that I would have done differently, I would have gotten more sleep, like
Yeah.
a lot more sleep than I got, because I would regularly, go out on Saturday night, close maxes with a lot of my close friends at the Emerald, and then get right to it the next morning. And while I felt like energized while I was doing the work, I definitely felt tired during the day. And thinking back to it, I'm like, ugh. One of my managing editor colleagues at the Emerald, who's at the Wall Street Journal now, Eliza Collins, like she would be the one dipping out from all of the parties at like 11 p.m.
Yeah.
Right, and saying like, all right, guys, I'm going to bed. And I wish I would have taken more of her lead to rest more, to be honest, because I was just so go, 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 go.
Mhm.
And if there's anything I have come to sort of feel indifferent about, or kind of have regrets about, I guess, about my time as a student, I know there's a certain element of it being necessary, but like the grind culture, right? And just kind of feeling like you always have to be on, you always have to be going. I would have given myself more leniency of like more time to rest, and more quality time outside. Because that, yeah, that I feel would have made for a happier and more productive undergrad experience. So I cannot pontificate enough on the essential, like, yeah, the need for rest and just kind of like mindfulness and just like sitting with your feelings every once in a while and just being like, okay, everything's going like crazy, but I can just sit here and, meditate on it for 5, 10 minutes before I go back to work.
Yeah, it's hard to strike up that balance for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, something that a lot of us are still trying to figure out.
Mhm.
Before we go, is there anything that I didn't ask? Any final thoughts you had? Anything that you wanted to elaborate on?
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing that I tell college students, high school students, whenever I have the opportunity, is never take an unpaid internship. Uh, doesn't matter how, you know, well regarded the publication is or what kind of work you think you can do there. You shouldn't let people get away with not paying you for producing work for them. Yeah, I mean,
That's a
the
great.
one of the big pushes, yeah, when I was a managing editor was we would have an internship board, right? And we would basically do a grid with the name of the publication, the date that the internship was applications were due, and the city that they were in. And I made it a point to make sure that we didn't have any unpaid position on that board. And I don't think we ever had any fewer than like 30 opportunities up there. So they're out there. Just be mindful of it.
Yeah, gotta learn how to seek it out, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was great getting to talk with you. And I wanted to extend a thank you too from all of us over at the Emerald. We appreciate your continued support and your kind of confidence in us as a collegiate publication.
For sure. Happy to do it.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Can't
Thanks for having me.